Welcome again, everyone, to the second talk in the Soane Foundation lecture series for 2020 and 2021. Our theme is color and light. And tonight we have with us Steven Holl, who will be speaking about air, light, and green space, a post-COVID architecture. I'm Michael Diaz-Griffith, the Foundation's Executive Director, and on behalf of the Foundation, I am so pleased to see you tonight. In just a few minutes, the webinar with Steven will begin, but first, a couple of notes about logistics. Tonight's program will consist of a lecture followed by a Q&A. So if you develop a question during Steven's presentation, please enter it into the Q&A box, which will appear on your screen. Additionally, if you're more comfortable with texting your question, you can send that to the number that I have typed into the chat box. We really look forward to hearing from you, and there will be a nice conversation at the end of this session. So again, please feel free to ask questions. They will be addressed at the end. With that, I would like to pass things over to our chairman, Paul Whalen, who will introduce Steven. Paul?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Michael. I want to thank our Executive Director, Michael Diaz-Griffith, and our program committee, especially Jonathan Hogg, who chairs that committee, along with Suzanne Stevens, who reached out to Steven Holl and wrangled him into doing this lecture for us this afternoon. The integration of air, light, and green space has consistently motivated Steven Holl's work. During a period of global pandemic, the need to carefully consider these aspects of the built environment is greater than ever before. This lecture focuses on past projects of Steven Holl Architects that hold potential lessons for a post-COVID architecture, focusing on principles such as the embrace of green space and landscape, mixing fresh air and natural light, the facilitation of open circulation for social spaces, and ecological integration and innovation. As for Mr. Holl himself, he was born in 1947 in Bremerton, Washington. He graduated from the University of Washington and pursued architecture studies in Rome in 1970. In 1976, he joined the Architectural Association in London and established Steven Holl Architects in New York City, a long time ago. One of America's most innovative and influential architects, Steven is recognized for his ability to blend space and light with great contextual sensitivity and to utilize the unique qualities of each project to create a concept-driven design. I want to add that as an organization that supports the Sir John Soane Museum in London, we at the Foundation are struck by the similar delight that we see taken by Steven Holl and by John Soane in the creation of surprising spaces that are inseparable from their evocative, memorable lighting. We're so happy that Steven Holl could join us here today. I'm a big fan. Welcome, Steven.
Are we unmuted? This is a watercolor of what's outside of my window here in Rhinebeck. It's like a painting. Brilliant yellow, red, and green, and blue sky. It's almost peak up here in the Hudson Valley. And it's like walking in a painting. So I should have made this lecture color and light and peak color in the Hudson Valley, but this is a different topic. So this is a talk which I've given once in Milan, and will give again in another couple of places because of the topicality of it, but it really connects with issues I've been working with for many years. Can I go to the next slide? I can't run it here, right? So I've just organized these projects under these topics: embrace green landscape space, maximize fresh air and natural light, open circulation and social space, outside simulcast, distance seating in auditoriums, ecological integration. And the first project is just a building that I'm really proud of that just opened at the Franklin and Marshall College of Art in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, the Winter Center for the Arts. And the project started in 2015 and it just finished, it just opened, and the students are occupying it now. It's a project that replaces a brick building which was rather windowless, sitting on that same site. And they want to double the size and make a place for artists, work of sculpture, of painting, architecture, of lectures in this building. 33,000 square feet. So my first sketch, because it's the Ben Franklin, change the slide. You're missing the slide that I'm talking about. Here. Anyway, the first parameters, the trees are the oldest thing on that campus. It's a really amazing campus, many historic buildings. But the trees, it's an arboretum with trees, some of them 300 years old and 4 feet in diameter. So we decided to the tree diameters. And so the key drawing, the key conceptual drawing was circles that causes the building to have concave surfaces. And then we're having trouble with the, we're not being able to move the slides here. Technical difficulties here, sorry. If you keep those five sentences on the screen long enough, everybody will remember what this lecture was about. Is that this idea? Every one of the projects in this talk embraces the green landscape. Everyone has natural light and ventilation. But each project starts, I can't run the slides here, huh? Okay. There you see the sketch, that first sketch, Ben Franklin's kite, the light, and the heavy. Marshall was a lawyer, and the idea of these two figures kind of being let's say a launching pad for the art center being up off the ground, and then the tree diameters being the second idea that really Daniel Porterfield, the president, loved this idea, and you can see that the building is floating in the trees, and it has a view to Buchanan Park in the distance. So working out a series of drawings of working out, there's that idea of a opening below, which becomes a kind of forum for the students, and it opens to the Buchanan Park. The building is made using Amish. This is Lancaster, Pennsylvania. It's Amish country, so we used Amish labor to do the wood roofs, all interlocked and hung on suspended tubes. 3-inch TNG wood, and they came with their beards and their buggies and put the roof in about 3 weeks. And you can see the layout of the floor plans where you have studios for design, studios for sculpture, all the different activities opening to a kind of central commons instead of a corridor. And those rooms all have big pivot doors, so they open very generously. So if you have a kind of visitation day, you can have these 8-foot wide doors opening, and people can come and go and look at what's going in the students' work. And the faculty is in a mezzanine level, so that there's faculty offices for each one of this is a woodworking studio and the faculty office above. And the structure also responds. It's like a box kite. Nat Oppenheimer, the structural engineer, figured out how we could use the full depth and with tiny steel members run the trusses horizontally, and they sit on these 2 concrete cubes at the bottom. There you see the building under construction, very lightweight magnetic induction bent tubes, and the wood suspended above. There you have a finished, that's the form below, the view to Buchanan Park in the distance and the campus on the other side. So it's really opening the green space on both sides. And that's a typical studio, woodworking studio. You see that suspended, and the sort of integral insulation of the U plank that gives that soft light and really good ecological insulation in the walls. The building has multiple entries. One ramp connects to Old Main so that students can actually really have a kind of free, they never have to use an elevator. It's really open circulation. And there's a large pool that collects rainwater and groundwater of the campus. So that pool is not just a reflecting pool, it's also double functioning ecologically. There you see how the trees give this geometry to the buildings. There it is at night with the recycled water reflecting pool. So I have several buildings that I'm going to show in less detail just to make the various points in this talk. And I put this in as a kind of, let's say, a parenthesis, because I've been giving a lot of lectures, and this chart that I'm going to show you comes from a lecture I made 19 years ago called Pro Kyoto. And it was my manifesto for, environmental architecture at a time when Bush had failed to join the Kyoto Climate Agreement. And now we have the same thing in our government happening again. Hopefully it'll all be over on the 3rd of November. But this chart, what I want to say is the relation of architecture today. I mean, when you think about architecture, as a teacher, I would give this chart. In fact, I just gave it in my class on Thursday. You could say, this starts with a chart that Colin Rowe made, where he put classic architecture in one column and modern architecture in another column. But he made that chart 45 years ago, and I decided to add the column for the 21st century. So for Colin Rowe, you have, for classic, you have the absolute; for modern, the relative; in the 21st century, we have the interactive. For the classic, you have the fixed; modern, you have the stable; in the 21st century, we have the dynamic. Classic is physical, metaphysical; modern is physical, real; 21st century is virtual, real. Classic is space and time; modern is Einsteinian space-time; 21st century is space-time information; it's changed. Classic is essence; modern is matter; 21st century is information. Classic is single; modern is divided; 21st century is diverse. Analogical, mechanical, digital. I made this chart 19 years ago, and I think it's very predictive. We're really there. Ritual, functional, operative. Symbolic, dogmatic, contingent. Harmonious, autonomous, accorded. We make an accorded architecture. Evocative, absent, reactive. Hierarchical, positional, tactical. Continuous, discontinuous, intermittent. Compact, fragmented, fractal. Uniform, variable, evolutional. I'm sure that our architecture needs to be evolutional, especially thinking about everything that's happening to us today. Exact, precise, combinatory. Whereas modern architecture was precise, like Le Corbusier's purism, we're combinatory. And I think about hybrid buildings as something very positive in cities. Predictable, measurable, differential. Norm, type, gene. And we think about the real breakthroughs in the gene. Like, I'll talk about that later. Protological, typological, topological. That is merging architecture and landscape. Formal, abstract, mixed. Figurative, structural, infrastructural. All of our buildings need to be more infrastructural. And that is like we did in this first building, that they connect to the water structures of the campus. Solemn, severe, easygoing. I'm not sure my architecture is easygoing, but I think I try to do that. Ceremonial, strict, uninhibited. Purist, pure, crossbred. Code, relationship, combination. Control, order, synergy. Flat 2D, volume, landscape, the merging of architecture and landscape, and composition, position, and disposition. So that was 19 years ago. I gave this talk yesterday, and Demetra said, you shouldn't put that in your talk tonight. So I did. There it is. This is the Nelson Atkins Museum of 2007, a merging of landscape and architecture, but also a museum sequence that really is open air and easy to negotiate. It was inspired by a painting from the 11th century, a Chinese painting. They have a huge Asian art collection that merges architecture and landscape. Can you go to the next? And you can see the original classical building and the new merged with the landscape, and you can walk in and out of those sculpture gardens. And that's a sketch of a Noguchi piece that later got installed there with the relationship of the garden outside. It's one of the largest sculpture gardens in the Midwest. And you see the plan, a very formal plan, and our lightweight merged with the landscape elements. So the building really is like laying down in the landscape, like a skyscraper that lays down 800 feet. And you can see the lenses bring light and air down into the building, and there's a service level below. So all the circulation is very open and free. And by the way, you can go in and out in the Nelson Atkins, out into the sculpture garden along that sequence. And in the big forecourt with the piece of art by Walter Di Maria, One Sun and 34 Moons, they often have big events there. The Kennedy Center, we just opened last November. This was a parking lot, what you're looking at in the foreground. And the extension was a competition that we beat a number of prominent architects, and we merged the landscape with architecture. I think it's the largest green roof in Washington, D.C. There you see the living memorial of JFK. It's an active space, which is very different from the Lincoln Memorial, the presidential memorial, which is an inactive space, or the Jefferson Memorial. This is about programming and about action. And that was a sketch about the 3 pavilions where we moved the river pavilion that was floating in the river, and because of the Army Corps of Engineers, we had to move it, but it's still the river pavilion and it still connects everything to the below. And you can see the landscape there, and how the actual shape is really about the voids between things, the voids between the pavilions and the way they shape the space. Through a section, you see that the pavilions are like tips of an iceberg because everything is happening underground. And that's that Edward Durrell stone building in the background, not opened in 1972. So water gardens, and there's the river pavilion on the left, there's the Glissando pavilion on the right, the main event space. All these things are connected below ground. And there you see the river pavilion and the cafe, Potomac River in the distance. There's the Lincoln Memorial. So these pavilions are organized so they line up with these major pieces of Washington, D.C. That's the opening. That's my daughter, Eo Helene Hall, walking around the pool. This is another event that was not the opening, right? That's not the opening. That's another event. By the way, they're having events now, amazing events right now, which are socially distanced out on the lawn. Oh, there's one that was we just got off of Instagram like 2 days ago. It's a concert where everybody's positioned out in the garden and the actual musicians are in the cafe. Those sliding doors we added, we thought about concerts from the River Cafe to the landscape outside. This is a sculpture which has been installed at Art Omai, and it's an experiment in CLT construction, a new kind of material. We're always doing this in our studio, is try to think about how the buildings are built and what they're made out of. And I'd never really built anything in CLT. Everybody's saying how great it is. And so I took this experiment and made this sketch about the solstice, the equinox, and the winter solstice. And you could occupy on a single bench June 21st, December 21st, September 21st, experience the light, but mainly to experiment with this material, CLT. And I was amazed that from a single sheet of this material, this robot cut the entire pavilion in, I don't know, like 2 days. And I mean, it was, we didn't have to do working drawings. We just sent our files to the robot. Next. And you can see it's working away, you know, I don't know, like works at night. Everybody goes home. But you have this detail, you know, this feeling of material and detail. There we are lowering it on screw piles into the landscape at Art Omai. And the experiment was a big success because it has this tactile quality. That's just the raw material, nothing else. And the robot's cut from our computer drawings without working drawings. So that's, I mean, in terms of the future, that's really the digitally driven way that we can have the feeling of craft and materiality. And I think that's something we've been exploring quite a few buildings. Maximize fresh air and natural light. I've been trying to do that since I built my mother's house in 1975. This is the doctoral building in the University of Colombia in Bogota. And it's a building that all the working drawings are done. And it's a building, Bogota, it's always about 70 degrees. It never really, because of the 8,000-foot elevation, it never really, the temperature is almost the same all year round. So I thought of a building that's really inside out, that really, it turns itself inside out as it's formed. So it's a courtyard building forming a green quadrangle for the campus and completing the wonderful road or master plan of the University of Bogota. But then these are some studies about how to turn the building inside out. And you can see all the classrooms are accessible from the outside. So you can just walk to a classroom, up a ramp and down an outside balcony and get to a classroom. So, and it's all solar cells on the roof, rain and gray water ponds, natural ventilation to all the rooms. And there's that big pergola that forms the, let's say, the portal, the entry portal, which I just thought about is a little bit close to our rock and roll. Maybe we should show that. Oh, sorry, we're working on a competition for the extension of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland. And I hope my competitors are not watching because we have a strategy similar to this. Anyway, so there's this portal and you see a cafe in the distance, and this is an abstract model. It's all green in the middle. All that wood is green. But in this building, we're all ready for the problem of this current pandemic, and who knows if there are more pandemics in the future. That is that all fresh air and ventilation, outside circulation, no need to use elevators. So the one modification we did to the working drawings is to space the auditorium seats farther apart and put a simultaneous projection. I think that's another part that's later on in the talk. So this is void space, hinge space housing in Fukuoka, my first building with an elevator. It's still there. It's 25 years old. I'm very proud of it. Again, all these apartments can be accessed from outside walkways. And there's no need to use an elevator. So I think, you know, I believe that, you know, the situation at hand calls for buildings like this that embrace the landscape in these water gardens, 4 water gardens, and being able to walk outside to get to your, there you see the water garden and the corridor to your apartment. And there are 30 apartments that interlock like a Chinese puzzle. In Glasgow, the School of Art, the Reed building, we won in a competition in 2009. And it's based on a concept of driven voids of light. They not only bring light in, they bring air in, and they are the structure of the building. So the entire building is based on these driven voids of light. You see the Macintosh building, the tragedy that it burned again. Great work, the Macintosh Glasgow School of Art. And our building, which only for 6 months was there before that one burned again. But anyway, the idea, the central idea really is about light coming in, about air and fresh air, but also that's the structure that holds the building up. There you see Overup's diagram about storm, rainwater, and natural ventilation and biomass energy. And you see the simplicity of the plan. And the complexity comes in the tilt of those driven voids and the way the circulation cuts through it. So it's a very dynamic spatial experience, but if you look at that plan, you wouldn't think so. I always draw the plans after drawing I have a concept. I do my watercolors of the interiors, and the last thing we do is the plans. I think that the making of the plan it's like writing the score in music, and it isn't something to look at necessarily by itself. There's the studios for, that's a design studio. There's also weaving. This is under construction, the Rubenstein Commons, the Institute for Advanced Studies. It was a competition we won against Rem Koolhaas, Oma, Williams and Sen, Moss Architects. And I think that we were the only ones that proposed a single level building. And I think that was what was called for here. And the idea of intertwining that with the landscape, nature, science, mathematics, humanities, the art, nature. So there's water gardens, you see, there's a water garden, a water garden, a water garden, 4 water gardens. And you see that red line is the path from the parking right through the building. And this is a commons building. It's a place for the scholars to congregate, to have almost like a clubhouse. The Institute for Advanced Studies is one of the most amazing institutions on the planet, the Max Planck Institute in Germany, I think. But this one is a very special place, and a donor gave the entire money for this, David Rubenstein. You see sketches that show this intertwining of landscape and architecture. And there you see this idea of space curves, also the kind of Einsteinian nod, the notion of 2 curved volumes intersecting and forming a space curve. A single level. And some obligatory computer drawings that show the cafe. We're making all these light fixtures now. That's another computer drawing showing the relation to the existing trees. And that building will open in about 6 months. So open circulation and social space. This is the Visual Arts Building at the University of Iowa, which opened in 2016. And it's a very large art facility, but we wanted to make it so that everyone could have natural light. It's 300 feet square, and that's hard to bring light in. So we cut it, and we call it multiple centers for art. So these 7 giant slices out of the 300-foot square bring light in, and ramp circulation connects everything so you don't have to use elevators. And that all those are outside courts and outside access, and the whole roof is green. And there you see the circulation, very open, and it's also a passage through the campus, from one end of campus to the other. Stairs as social condensers and connectors. There's places to sit, places to get outside. So every one of those multiple centers of light is a kind of social space. Everybody here is 6 feet apart, as you see in that photograph. And, you know, it was a great challenge because I had done the Iowa College of Art that opened in 2002, I guess it did, 2000. We started that in 1999, and that was all in Corten steel, cantilevered over the water. And then we had moved that building to cantilever over this water garden, and then we saved this central space as a quadrangle. And so we were challenged when we won the competition to do the new building. The building had to be twice as large, and it had to save that garden that we wanted to save in the first place. So it was a very interesting moment to have to build kind of next to yourself. This is the Lewis Center for the Arts, opened in 2017. Very open building with a quadrangle in the center. That's the music building. And it's the idea, you know, years before Renzo Piano had done a single building for this institution. And when we did this sort of limited competition, we proposed 3 buildings, one for dance, one for literature and poetry, one for music. And they all have a different concept. And they all are united around a big central forum that connects everything, very open and with skylights in the water gardens above, bringing natural light. There's a model. It shows you what's structural. The structural concrete is then sheathed in Lecce stone from a quarry in Lecce, Italy. And there you have the building at night. This is the way you enter Princeton's campus now. From the Dinky, you get off and walk that ramp up, and that's the main entrance to the campus. And we did all the details. They were a great client that let us do a Laban dancing stair for the dance building. One of the things I really believe in is that architecture is really, it's something that you experience in a tactile way, in an intimate way. So hand railings, light fixtures, you know, everything in a building is really important. So it's important to have a client that believes in that. And here you see the practice rooms, acoustically isolated from one another, suspended on rods from beams that run counterintuitively in the long direction of the building, and you can see right through that building. Here we have the Maggie Center in London that opened on my 70th birthday in 2017, not very far from John Soane's house. And the concept here was, it's by St. Bart's, which is a place of great musical history. And the concept was a thing within a thing within a thing, a bamboo basket that is warm with natural material, a concrete kind of hand, that's the structure, and a kind of glass case which has neum notation, which is the ancient monasteries use this neum notation as a musical notation. So we took that neum notation and made a kind of new sort of stained glass with oculus. And the building's curtain wall is a kind of staff, a staff of bars, a musical staff. There you see a section. There you see the natural bamboo and the neum notation embedded in the oculus. This is the Hunters Point Library that opened last September, just about a year ago. And the idea was the digital and the book. And they have, everyone is on computers, so they're sitting behind, and then in front are the book stacks. So when you enter the building, you see book stacks, but then there's places to be sitting on your computer. And it forms a garden space, a reading garden, and it has a great view of Manhattan. So the whole building became a vertical statement to get the maximum view of Manhattan for this little community, this community library. I think this is at the opening. And that stairway gives a direct view to the United Nations building, Lou Kahn's FDR Memorial, and all the rest of Manhattan in the distance. So it's really a place, and this is the Children's Library, and there's a rooftop cafe. You see the Empire State Building in the distance. But this is a place that gives to the community the kinds of views all those rich people have in condominiums behind it. And I'm very proud of the fact that Jimmy Van Brenner supported the idea that the building should be vertical. We could have built this building in a one-story library on the ground. But Jimmy Van Brenner and I agree that it should be something more of a gift of that view and that feeling of a public building in the landscape around it. This is the Glassell School of Art that opened in 2018. And it was part of a competition where the organizers' brief said that we had to build, the competitors, Snøhetta and Morphosis and us, had to build a 7-story parking garage in order to free up the site for this new museum. And because that was a church parking lot, and they made an agreement with the church to purchase the parking lot. However, the church said, you have to provide our parking first. We can't let you start building the building. So there was an existing school here that we proposed you have to tear down and build a new school. Then the existing school was only 40,000 square feet. We said, let's make a new school of 80,000 square feet, double the size. Now we can put a layer of parking underneath, and you won't have to build a parking garage. And you can have a sculpture garden twice as large. There's the Noguchi sculpture garden there, and the larger extension of the sculpture garden. And in my presentation, I said, I think it's a little bit larger than the sculpture garden in Dallas. And I think that's why we won the competition, you know, Houston versus Dallas. Anyway, there's the building when it opened, and you see the roof terrace that gives a view back to the whole campus. It's classrooms, studios, sculpture studios, painting studios, art studios. They have the largest, I think, art education program of any museum in America. Then they educate school kids all the way down to 3 years old, 3 to 12. It's an amazing educational facility. So making that larger building, the first move was something they embraced. And there's the center of the L-shaped building. It's a kind of elbow moment where everything opens up and you have this multifunctional space. And the building is made out of precast concrete elements that hold the floors up. So that's the structure. There's no facade. You're looking at the structure. And every studio has a operable window, a 3x3 operable window, which I had to fight for. Natural ventilation to all the studios. There you see the whole campus now. The Mies van der Rohe building from 1953, and 1973. The Moneo building from 2000. Our Glassell School, which is just finished in 2018. And now, this month, on the 15th of November, we're opening the big Piece de la Resistance, the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, the Kinder Pavilion. And there you see, that was the competition model. And I don't know if this presentation has any of those concept drawings in it, but there you see a reason. Yes. So what my idea was about light, and the Houston sunlight is very harsh. I love the Kimball Art Museum and the way Kahn made that idea of those vaults and the silver light coming in, but I couldn't do anything mimicking that. And I have a much more, let's say, open-ended idea, and that is that these big clouds are like spheres pushing down on the building, and then the light slips underneath them, almost like the way it comes in underneath clouds. And then the circulation in a museum is very important. I think this is our 10th museum, and you can see the idea, there's no dead-end circulation. You have 7 gardens that open out on the ground floor, but those are also openings on every level up. So in the 3 levels, you get the feeling of orientation no matter where you go. And that's a recent photograph. You can see she has a mask on. I think it was taken a week ago or 2 weeks ago. It's just getting ready to open now. And those are those kind of cloud formations bringing the natural light from above. And that's that central space that always gives you orientation, and the natural light is. And there's one of the galleries. You see the cloud-like elements that bring the light in. And the outside is made in what I call a cold jacket. These tubes are 30 inches in diameter, and they're hollow, and they're open at the bottom and open at the top. So when the hot Houston sun hits the wall, due to the chimney effect, the hot air rises and drags the air across the facade, reducing the solar gain by 90%. But it also gives me a luminous way to light the middle floors, and also to light from the outside at night. And there you see the building. This photograph is from a week ago. And Hervé Descott was down there adjusting the lighting, and this is the glowing presence. You see the Mies van der Rohe building on the right, the Moneo Pavilion in the distance. You see a piece of our Glassell building, and this building that no one has seen before. This is the first time anybody is seeing this building. It's going to be opening on the 15th of November. Outside simulcast distance seats in auditoriums. That's what we did at the Reach. but this is something now with the digital power we have. We have a 30,000 lumen projector that puts an image on the glissando pavilion that's totally clear and wonderful. So you can have an opera where it's $300 a seat going on in the Kennedy Center, and you can simulcast project it outside for free. And I'm sure in a democracy like ours, John F. Kennedy is smiling in his grave for an idea like that to happen, because the Kennedy Center it gets very expensive to go to those performances. And similar now that we realize the technology is so easy, we're doing a similar thing in Bogota, simulcast projection in that entry portal. Ecological integration, it's the last section. I'll just touch on these buildings. This is the linked hybrid in China that opened in 2009. It's a hybrid building with living, recreation, and working, embracing the landscape. And it's connected by these bridges, one with a swimming pool, one with a theater. But the main point I'm making here is it's cooled and heated by 660 geothermal wells, 100-meter deep. This was an experiment that, thanks to this very ambitious Chinese client, we were able to do with Matthias Schuler of TransSolar. But this is the largest geothermal array ever attempted in a residential project at this time. And I'm very happy to say that here we are, how many years later? 12 years later, and it's still working. It cools and heats 740 apartments geothermally. So what happens is the ambient temperature of the water table actually changes, but you can recycle it. So if we raise by a couple of degrees, we get it back in the winter. So it's an interesting thing that if somebody wants to talk about that later, I can get into more detail. And all the water is gray water recycled. So the pools, the big water gardens in the middle of this project are all recycled water. And we achieve no smell and no problem by an ultraviolet zapping tank. So the ducks love it. There's frogs and turtles. It freezes in the winter. So it's a great public space at the center of this project. This was in the New York Times today when they were talking about what's the future of architecture and the skyscraper. And they were saying that maybe the skyscraper, where you're crowded into elevators and you have to go up like Hudson Yards, jammed together, all those towers jammed together. Anyway, they gave this example. This is one of the examples. And it's a horizontal skyscraper, was a competition we won in 2009. Offices for Vanke headquarters, a hotel, residences, condominiums. And the competition brief said the height is 35 meters. We have the very large site, and we decided to give the whole site over to green. It's a tropical landscape, and build the whole building at 35 meters. And they would have ocean views. This is right on the ocean, and also, heaven forbid that we have high water and flooding, but this building is oblivious to that because it's up in the air instead of down on the ground. I didn't expect to win this competition, but Wang Shu, the great client, loved the idea, and they gave us. This was also a Greenspace. That was a 60,000 square meter site, but because we're raising above and it's tropical, and we have a green roof of 15,000 square meters, we actually get 75,000 square meters of green space from a site that only had 60,000 square meters of green space. So I did a kind of Walter Burley Marx landscape. It's tropical there, and because the building is 20 meters in the air and it's tropical, everything grows. So I wouldn't do a building like this in New York, but because of that climate, you could actually, and then the shadow is really something positive in Shenzhen. And so this sun-protected outdoor spaces in shadow it's a positive dimension. That was right at the opening, big water gardens. That's a winter shot. We should have a lush vegetation shot there. And these are just Matthias Schuler's diagrams of how the different facades. There's many different facades, each one responding to a different sun condition. We did the solar shades. We designed this automatic louver system that was based on palm fronds and actually rotate and bring dappled light into the interior. And of course, there's a solar array on the roof. And all the materials were ecological, like bamboo. This is the main offices, all done in bamboo. In the nighttime, the cores that hold the building up become the light fixtures at night. So that's basically my talk, and these 5 points in different ways. And I open it up to questions.
Thank you, Steve. That was wonderful. I have to, I'm embarrassed to say this is the first time I've heard you lecture. And after all these years, I was really excited to see all your work. And I always think of you as a great formalist, and I didn't really know that you were so interested in sustainability at the same time. That was very informative for me to see that you go in both directions.
No, it's we've been doing sustainability since day one. My mother's house, done in 1975, is a passive solar house in Manchester, Washington, built for $79,000. You know, so I've been doing that for a long time. I worked as a landscape architect for Lawrence Halpern in 1975, and I studied under Richard Haig, landscape architect. And Ian McCard's book, Design with Nature, was one of my Bibles in architecture school. So yeah, I'm interested in geometry too, but I mean, ecological dimension is very important. And I think today, more than ever, that's one of the things that we can bring to the forefront.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Now, Steven, can you see the Q&A box, or would you like us to read out questions? Either works.
What are your solutions for handicap with no elevators? Ramps can be difficult in a wheelchair. We do ramps that are 1 and 12. You're right, and there is elevators. In other words, all the buildings that we do have handicap access to all floors. But the point is, like in a building like the Winter Arts Center, the ramps access all the levels. So the people in wheelchairs use the elevator, but they're using it by themselves, basically. Are the stacks in the library wooden? Okay, that was those stacks in that library. There's something like 50 square feet that wasn't accessible by a wheelchair, and someone got me by the throat, and they did a whole thing on me in the New York Times, you know. And now we have a chairlift that makes those whatever square feet accessible. And yeah, that was a gotcha moment in my life. I had a full page article about, I don't know, the 2 layers where it wasn't accessible by wheelchair. And we have already rectified it, but because of all the brouhaha, when the library has not installed that lift yet. So they removed all the books from the ones that are not accessible. So if you want to go to the library, go ahead and see it, and you will see there's no books there where the lift can't get to it. And we're going to get that little lift in there. It's not even expensive. Anyway, what material was the tubes? That's laminated glass with an inner layer. And it's that was a very difficult facade to make. So the tubes were actually bent, and they take 24 hours, I think, each tube, and laminated in Shenzhen. Then they were shipped to Bavaria, and they were fitted out by Permis de Lisa, I believe, and then they were installed in Houston. But because of the economy in the process, we were able to beat we brought it in on budget. Your projects are fascinating, filled with sunlight and shadow. They seem to breathe and take off a life of their own. Christine Rother. Thank you, Christine. That wasn't a question, but thank you.
It's a good segue, though, for a question that I know Paul and I have been thinking about, which is how Soane might have inspired some of your work. I mean, your handling of natural light is masterful.
Oh, he loved, yeah, absolutely. I
see a connection.
John Soane was a great architect, and when I lived in London at Cranley Gardens, and I went to the AA in Bedford Square. So I visited the Soane Museum more than once, and I also loved his collection of prints and drawings and the love of architecture, the passion for architecture. I feel definite connection with him. I just don't feel a connection with the type of architecture that he did, but natural light was certainly part of it. But I have an archive building up here that we just built. It's 3,000 square feet, and it's filled with models of all of our buildings over the years. But I also have a collection of architects. I have 8 Lou Kahn drawings, and I have drawings by Zaha Hadid and Wolf Prix, and I'm going to make that available like the Soane Museum, but it's going to be up here in Rhinebeck. That's all I could afford.
Right. That's great.
So
we have a question from Raymond Ryan.
Okay, any special memories of London, the AA in the 70s? What thoughts not about building in Scotland? I was at the AA in 1976, and it was an amazing place. Alvin Boyarsky was absolutely charismatic. And at that time, there was, the day I arrived at the AA, I went to the members bar and I sat down, and it was 1 o'clock. It was going to be a lecture in 15 minutes. And there was a kind of overweight guy in a blue shirt sitting on the bar stool next to me with hush puppies, and both the laces were untied. And I said, "It's James Sterling." And it was. So I started to chat, and he had a big mug of beer. That was my first experience at the AA. And then a week later, there was a review in Ilya Zengalis and Rem Koolhaas's studio. They asked me to be on the review. Alvin came. The way I got into the AA is Alvin Boyarsky was in San Francisco, and he was a friend of Howard Backen. I was working for Howard. It was a great architect. Anyway, Alvin said, "Let me see your portfolio." I said, "I'd like to go to the AA. I wanted to work for Lou Kahn, but he died. I'd like to go to but I don't have I don't have the funds. Let me see your portfolio." And he loved the portfolio. Said, "You come and you do crits at the undergraduate level, and we give you free tuition. You can sweep the floor in the graduate school, and we'll give you So that's how I got to the AA. And the day that I got there, I showed my portfolio to Ilya Zengalis, and he invited me to a review. And it was about Malevich Architecton. And the idea was Ilya and Rem gave this project that usually you're given a program and a site, and you're asked to come up with a form. But they gave a form and asked you to come up with a program and a site. So they gave Malevich 1920 Architecton. And in that, I think it was 10 students, there was a very fat girl from Baghdad that had just come from Leon Creer's studio. And she did this beautiful over the Thames bridge. But she with pink magic marker, she made arches in it because she had just come from Leon Creer's studio. That was Zaha Hadid. That was the moment of discovery. And I leaned forward, Rem Koolhaas leaned forward, and we said, "Brilliant project, but you got to get rid of those arches." And I was close to Zaha her whole life. In fact, she came to our apartment in 2016 in March. On March 16th. Anyway, okay, more questions. Sorry. Well, he said reminisce. Okay. What thoughts not about building in Scotland and Ireland? I love the climate. I'm from Seattle, from the Olympic Peninsula, from the Kitsap County. So the rain and the low sun angles of winter, they are just like Scotland and Ireland. So to me, to build there is to build in a climate where I cherish the light and I understand the rain. So we opened the Glasgow School of Art in 2014, and now we're really excited about doing the University College of Dublin Creative Design Center, and it's in working drawings right now. We won the competition 2 years ago. So Ireland, Dublin, Ireland, yes, that's wonderful. I can't wait to go back. I was there just before the pandemic. Do you have a favorite project? Of course, it's my one that I'm working on right now. because I'm very excited about it, and I can't tell you about it because it's a competition. What do you think about the next generation architects needs to focus on? Absolutely, we absolutely must focus on every ecological dimension that we can bring, and that's what this lecture is about. Natural light and natural air, embracing green space, making buildings net zero, no fossil fuels, using every possible renewable energy. And I think architecture can be an enormous contribution to a much better condition of the future. And I'm hoping to add an optimistic dimension to that.
Does incoming light in your structures cause paint to fade or objects?
Leslie has an interesting question on the topic of light. Does incoming light in your structures cause paint on the walls to fade, or, you know, objects or fabrics in the case of museums? How do we handle the practical ramifications of having so much
Almost all the museums that I've been doing have indirect light, so there's no sunshine directly coming into the galleries. So I mean, indirect light is a diffused light. Like in Houston, it's 25-foot candles. So but it's an active natural light, you know, and like in the Kiasma Museum in Helsinki, you know, you have the winter light is very different than the summer light, but the direct sunlight does not come in.
Dhruv Mehta also has a question about light, which is fun.
Would you say that your fascination with luminosity and diffuse light tries to take architecture towards something more ethereal?
Absolutely. I think that light is a spiritual dimension. You know, it gives us a certain feeling, and as the light changes during the seasons, and actually now we have neurological evidence that natural light actually improves our health, and we didn't have that 20 years ago. But now, you know, with neuroscience and the ability to actually trace electronically and digitally the synapses of the brain and how the brain functions, we have real scientific evidence of the positive dimensions of natural light.
But that doesn't completely draw or social light. No, it is raw. It is social too.
Right.
But
We have time for one more question, and I see that. Well, oh goodness, we have several. Maybe if those of
I would like to talk to music and architecture. I think that this is, you know, we teach, Dimitra and I teach a class called the Architectonics of Music, and we've been teaching that for years, and I find it a very important analogy. Why? Because sculpture you can turn away from, painting you can turn away from, poetry you can read it but put it down. Architecture is immersive, as is music. It surrounds you. But what's important is the inside of the spiritual feeling. Music doesn't have an elevation. It has an interior. It has an inside. So we give, in our class, we give fragments of music, and we ask the students to make a building based on a work by Morton Feldman or a work by Yanis Xenakis. And I think this is a way of exploring dimensions of architecture which are very inspiring, and we get some really amazing, unpredictable proposals from our students, and using music as a guide.
So,
Steven, if you're interested in answering any more questions, I think we could spare just a couple more minutes.
Do you want to pick one? Dimitra will choose.
Could you talk about some media that has most influenced your architectural philosophy?
I have a huge library of poetry, and I believe, you know, I'm a member of Copper Canyon Press, which publishes unknown poets. I have all of the work of Paul Celan and Rilke. I think Rilke is like an angel that was delivered on earth. That's what John Haydock said, you know. John Haydock, at the end of his life, was drawing angels in all of his proposals. And someone asked him, you know, do you really believe in angels? And he said, Beethoven was an angel. Rilke was an angel. There are angels that were sent to us on earth to inspire us. Anyway, I think poetry and I also have a huge collection of philosophy. I have all of the work of Merleau-Ponty, all of the work of, I think I'm kind of a bookish blockhead that way. I'm an academic guy, I'm not, a populist that way. I really love books and libraries and reading. So John Soane was like that too, I think.
Exactly. Steven, thank you so much. I just want to say that I'm really excited to hear that you are going to have a kind of a museum where you'll put your favorite objects and maybe all of your books together. That sounds wonderful. You have so many ideas that many people understand, but the idea that people in the future could go to your museum and see what your thoughts were like.
Well, it's not really a museum. It's just it's an archive building. It's
archive. Yeah.
We would have to have some sponsor. If there's somebody there that wants to sponsor a museum, I'm happy to do it. But right now it's basically an archive. It's like a storehouse. So
right.
But there are reading tables at the front. I mean, we're not finished with it yet. The building is finished. It's only 3,000 square feet. But we hope to move all the books up from New York. I haven't been down to my office since March 13th, so been working here in Rhinebeck. So.
Right. So, but it's so important that place will exist, and it is very much like John Soane's house and museum. And one of the reasons that we're here today, that we have this lecture series, is to help support that museum. And it is a place that I think has changed the lives of young architects when they go to see it. Interior designers, it is also a wonderfully imaginative place, as your work is, Steven. Normally, by the way, in the fall, we might be welcoming some of you to our gala, but we're not having it this year because of COVID, which we've been talking about tonight. So we're going to do a fundraiser instead. So some of you might receive a little note, and maybe if you could throw a couple of dollars our way, that would be lovely. In the interest of sort of keeping alive the thoughts of a great architect. And I have to say, it was wonderful to hear another great architect today, and to know that he will be helping us to keep his thoughts alive with his archives. So thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, Steven. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.